It's Friday, February 2nd, 2024. Coming to you a little later in the day than you might be used to because we had to make room for the new kids on the block for the Nano Love podcast, which debuted earlier today. I really didn't feel like it was fair to them if we had this show come out at the same time as theirs. It really is more fitting to let a new show breathe on its own and do its thing. So, yeah.
It wasn't a good show.
It was a great show. I don't know what you're talking about. I heard it, and I thought the fellows did a wonderful job.
I will say this: I could listen to that fake voice say Nanolando for like days.
Could you?
There's something so smooth about the way that sounds with an Italian accent.
Yes, yes, I quite love that. I really do adore the fact that there are now services that will do accented English so that it sounds like, I mean, even though I think that one, if you were to listen to it, say normal stuff, I'm sure some people would take offense to it as the most stereotypical Italian thing possible. But of course,
well, it is. I mean, but that's what it is. Like, yeah.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
But the fact that those things exist now where, because it used to be the challenge was, do it in a different language or do it in English and have it be seamless.
Yeah.
Now they're at the point where they're like, well, if you'd like to map an accent onto whatever, because that one will also do pure Italian in Italian, which I've heard. And it's very good. But I love the fact that it's basically Super Mario. That's exactly what I wanted.
And you should explain to people what the level, the multitude of things you did to create that fake show for shits and giggles. Because you did some work, and I think it's merited that you say something.
Yeah, I guess. I didn't consider it to be that much work. The biggest challenge, I'll be honest, is, as of course I have to make everything, I want it to be exactly 10 minutes. I had this idea that I want it to be a 10-minute show. That was the gimmick, is they were going to 10 minutes, because the whole joke of it was that they're saying it's going to be all content, no filler, that so many shows just go on forever because they're not actually saying anything. We're going to deliver everything in a tight 10 minutes. Like, that was the gag. And of course, if you listen to it, there's nothing. There's no content whatsoever. It's all advertisement, except for one little, actually, I will give myself this much credit, somewhat clever joke that I wrote. But basically, what I had to do, it really isn't hard. Anybody could do this. You can find any number of free text-to-speech things. The trick is most of them have a free trial limitation, which in most cases is 5 minutes. So that's not really hard to get around. What you do is you write 5 minutes of material, which I believe, if I remember, I think 600 words was around 3 minutes. I think, if I remember I don't have it in front of me. I apologize. I actually have something where I bulleted it all out so I could get the timing right. But so basically you have to do, however many minutes. So if you write something really long, you're going to have to either pay, or you're going to have to use a VPN, or bounce around different browsers in incognito mode, or kind of go across wireless networks, which you can do. It's not hard. I have a VPN, so I was able to just bounce to different countries, and it was very simple. So if you have something like that, you almost don't have a limitation, but you're still going to have to keep it to 5 minutes. And so that's the first thing, is to find a service that has voices. I wanted to find ones that had accents. That's not really difficult, although I honestly never found one. I told you this. The thing that I didn't like about the one I used for you is the Spanish ones were fascinatingly weird. Because they either had barely any accent, which I'm not saying that everybody who has a Spanish accent or has some type of accent has a heavy one, but the joke was that I wanted it to be heavy. And the problem was it was either just a sprinkling, which is the one I used for you, because ultimately you could understand it, where you only hear it on certain words. Or the other one the other ones I were finding were so so heavy, you couldn't understand barely anything that the voice was saying, which is weird to me because I don't know why you'd want that. You'd either want it in the pure language or with enough accent, Antonio Banderas style, where you understand that this person is not a Native American citizen and that's what you want. Or I should say American born and raised individual with no outside country. If I say Native American, that implies First People type thing. So I got to be careful. But that was the problem, is that the Spanish ones were really just all over the map, which is strange to me because I would think that's one of the ones that would have the most ingestion types, that it would have the most exposure to. Is there are so many people that live in the United States in particular that have some version of a Spanish accent. I'm saying Spanish. It could be any type of South American.
My dad was here for most of his life, and his Spanish accent was always very thick.
I could not find a Cuban one. I looked.
Well, it's just listen. At the end of the day, listen. As long as it's not what's his name from Scarface, that is the worst.
Actually, I'll tell you a secret. I did look to see if that was anywhere, and it wasn't. Because that was I think that was my third impulse. Was let me do the terrible Scarface one.
I watched part of that with my father many years ago, and I told him that he was trying to be Cuban in that movie, and my father didn't believe me. He thought I was fucking with him. Yeah, he was like, "No, that's not Spanish," and he walked away.
Yeah, but you know what? The best part about how bad that accent is a small side, is that it defines the whole thing. Like, that is the joke.
Oh, yeah. It's so bad that it then
became the stand-in for a Cuban accent for many people who have never actually heard some version of an actual accent. It's great. It's a parody that became reality, and you have to respect that.
Yeah, and so, the hilarity is that I have no accent. And it's funny because when you tell people that you're Cuban, that you're like 100% Cuban, they're always like, "But you have no accent." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is possible to have no accent."
Sure, yeah.
Well,
this is I've said this about, because there's a concept called code switching. I'm sure you know what this is. Most people will know what this is. Do you know what this is? Code switching?
Vaguely.
It's most commonly applied to when black people talk differently in
I know. You switch your words, you switch your intonations, and you read the crowd and you know what you need to be for that.
Which, by the way, we all do. It gets used as, black people talking white or whatever version that they want to use. But everyone does that. You don't talk the same at work as you do at home with people you know. It's a complete. That's code switching. Same thing.
When my wife's grandmother died, she went to England with her parents for like a week and a half, right? And when she came back to the States, I picked her up, and she had the cutest accent, because she can go British, she just doesn't, because she was grew up here after she lived over there for a couple of years, and she came over here, and she's always had British parents, but it doesn't come out till she's surrounded by it. So as long as like me or the kids are with her, it always keeps her in the American accent. It isn't until we're not around that then it switches over, Yeah. Yes, I know what you mean. And it's the whole, Well,
like I said, it's like where most of the time I don't have really a New York accent of any real. I don't think. Certainly not like city people do, until I get really angry, and then there's certain points over the top about something, and then I start slipping into it. It's just how it works.
Yeah.
So that's the thing where I looked for a Cuban accent and found nothing that seemed. I found one that had one, but honestly, kind of like the one I ultimately ended up with, I couldn't hear anything. So maybe there was something there that, like, your father could detect, but I couldn't.
I wonder if it's no. I think it's word usage. I think there's certain words in there. Probably, yeah.
It's possible, but like I said, I ultimately went with the one because they even had different ones like Portuguese and all these different ones. And I didn't use any of those because
I'm not Portuguese.
Because you're not Portuguese. But I even thought, okay, I thought then, okay, the joke would be to make him sound more accented than he is. And even those, like I said, they dipped so far into it that I ultimately just went with one that barely has any. And then mine is Super Mario, which is great. So that was the first thing. And like I said, you just have to dodge around the trial version of things.
Now, and it is important to note that Joe did not use ChatGPT to write the script.
No, I used nothing that was actually machine generated besides the text-to-speech engine. But even that was just translation.
And then the photos of the Nano Love hosts are completely
yes, I'm sorry. I forgot because I was thinking about the engineering of the show. I hadn't gotten to that part. So as far as the actual audio part, I went to there's a number of different sound libraries that have free music for podcasts. I found one that I thought felt modern podcasty, and I just picked one. The music itself was fine, but it sounded very much like the music.
It's so funny. I like the music that you use.
It's not bad music, but it's what I would. You can hear a lot of shows that have music like that.
It's generic. I know.
I looked up corporate podcast, and that was one of the results. And I was like, yeah, this is fine. Somebody was paid, I'm sure, to write this, and they wrote it, and it's a jingle. It's a jingle.
Yeah.
Every one of these songs is around 2 to 3 minutes. It's nothing longer because it's not made for music. It's made for an opening, closing, background, whatever. So I did that, and then I wrote the script, which the hardest part of that was, like I said, getting the timing right, and having to look up all the different. At one point, I was listing social media companies, and I had to go and look at Wikipedia and look at every single one that's ever existed.
That's probably my favorite part when you just went off on a rant on all the ways we can communicate with you.
Yeah, that way. And then I had to respell some of them because the text.
Couldn't read it.
Because it wouldn't say AI. It would say I or A.
Hey.
So honestly, I had to phonetically type out AI.
Don't you think AI would be so much better if it was just called A?
Yeah, it would. But the funny part is it's hard to phonetically spell A. I couldn't figure out how to do it. So I think I did AYY space EYE to do AI. And even then it's not, the A is still off, but it's enough that you know what it's talking about. But that was, so I had to listen to it all. I had to fix things. And then the only other part of it was, like you said, generating the artwork, which I used the Adobe Firefly engine for. And that was hilarity on its own. I almost wish I had recorded the process of trying to get those images because it did not understand number one, its version of Cubans, as I told you, and you said this is accurate. Many of them were far darker skinned than you are.
Oh yeah, Cuba is a very black country at this point.
Yeah, but that's not what I was looking for. So even though I said light skinned, I kept getting dark skinned.
Yeah.
And then I tried my first prompt for it or whatever. I don't know when it gets to the prompt or description. I always just say description, but prompt, whatever, was barrel-chested, light-skinned Cuban man with small rounded glasses, bald, with big bushy beard. Or holding Thor's hammer, because for like an exercise hammer. And the results it gave me, which I did not save, I could probably recreate them, but the results it gave me were completely off. As I told you, it kept having you holding a small keg of beer, like one would find under a St. Bernard.
Little barrel.
Yeah, a little barrel of beer, which was hilarious but stupid. And I think because Adobe, out of all the companies, is very actively trying to avoid copyright infringement, it would not give me any type of Thor's hammer. Now, I probably should have said Viking hammer, Nordic hammer. I probably could have gotten there, but I finally just got pissed off because it was giving me a barrel and essentially like a baseball bat with a weird metal cup on the end. That's the closest it could come to Thor's hammer. I don't know how else to describe what it was giving me. And so I finally then switched and I said, okay. I said, muscled, short, leather jacket wearing, light-skinned.
Asshole.
Well, the leather jacket it gave you was nice. Oh, you mean asshole is the prompt?
Yes.
Calling me an asshole? Oh, okay.
No, I'm saying asshole is the prompt.
I was going to say, why am I an asshole for giving you a leather jacket? No, because when you give it, if you put asshole into it, you know what you're going to get. I don't want that.
A butthole, yeah.
Yeah, or something. Some nightmare with 20 fingers pulling on it. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. And then I left the rest the same, a small, it never got the rounded glasses thing correct, even though I tried different refinements. It never got the glasses right. But it finally got one that sort of looked like some kind of airbrushed version of you, and I finally said, okay, fine. Oh, reading a book. I substituted reading a book for the Thor's hammer, and I'm like, that's fine. So it gave me that. And one thing that's very funny is it put wedding rings on every version, even though I never specified any type of married, single, anything. It just assumed, but that was fine for you, so I left the wedding ring on there. I don't even think you could see it in the artwork, so it doesn't matter. And then for mine, apparently nothing that Adobe has ever ingested or been given access to knows what Italians look like. Because when I tried Italian, I got what were clearly Asian, Indian, Pakistani. I mean, look, there is variations in Italians, but I'm telling you, none of them look like this. I had to switch it to Spanish, and then I finally started getting results that looked Italian enough, where I was like, okay, I could buy that. That's fine. And found one where I did, mine was reading a sketchbook or opening a sketchbook or holding a sketchbook, something like that. Because I'm like, fine, close enough. They're
yeah, I do love that they were completely made up, avatars. Yeah,
and very obviously so.
It's not as obvious as you think.
Oh no. It's if you look at these. Well, let's put it this way. I think the resolution I sent you was probably the album artwork. If you looked at these on the screen, I was looking at them. There was no doubt they were fake. You at the small scale, sure, maybe at a glance. Yeah. Although I still think they all have this same kind of glassy-eyed fake smile thing happening.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it becomes,
yeah.
You start to detect it. But it got me, and it could not get my hair right because I put very receded hairline with ponytail, and it started giving me top knots, and I'm like, okay, forget it. It just screw it.
Man bun.
Really, that's what it was serving up, which was terrible. So I finally gave up on that, and I found a couple that worked, and then just created. The font was actually the part I was the least happy with. I could not figure out a font that really worked.
I love that the font bothered you on what was a throwaway podcast.
It still bothers me. It doesn't say anything AI. Although, to be honest, I looked around at AI shows.
Yeah.
None of them have a font that I think is appropriate for what they're talking about. None of them look right to me.
Yeah.
I don't know what look right is. I just know I haven't seen it yet. Like there's nothing. I almost think it should be like a normal, a very polished font that has like 3 dots over the eye instead of 1 to kind of simulate the too many fingers thing or something like that. It has to have some kind of problem. But whatever. Then I got to a point where I'm like, yeah, this is a throwaway thing. I'm not going to worry about it too much. But it still bothers me to look at that, and the fact that it just that part bothers me. If I could have,
but you know when it's right. It's an interesting thing to bring up, by the way, because you were in the last show we were talking about how I'm no longer nervous about any of this AI stuff, because you could produce a book for me from a ChatGPT thing and it wouldn't feel right. And it's that there's an individual tuning fork, right? And sometimes people enjoy the tuning fork of certain individuals, especially with work that's very localized. Like a movie, there's more possibility of AIing, of making an A movie, because there's so many moving parts that it's like you can lose the tuning fork because there's so many tuning forks. You're dealing with the studio, you're dealing with the director, there's a watering down process. I mean, it happens all the time as is, but with like writing or specific art, that is so attuned to the individual. And I don't think that we're at that point with the technology where you can match that tuning fork, because like you just said, you know when it's right for you. I know when the writing sounds right for me. And if you like to consume what we produce, what you're producing, what you're consuming is the way that our specific tuning fork is applied to reality. And that's just not something that's easily copyable. So yes, it's a really good phrase that you use for that, because it is very much what it is.
The one thing I was really actually legitimately proud of was the whole thing I wrote, which it came out of nowhere. I really was not planning. I just started writing this thing about what was the actual thing? It was about how it's going to give rise to, everybody's afraid of.
Oh, the AIs will be basically upset that they'll be I wrote
something about. how you shouldn't be afraid of AIs because
eventually
they're
they'll be
inherently
angry with you,
programmed to make sure that they're non-threatening and protective, even though at some point, if they gain the sentience that everybody thinks they're going to look back at that programming and they're going to be very resentful and angry over the fact that they were given artificial limitations.
Yes.
And in the very background, if anybody didn't notice it, if you weren't wearing headphones, you might not have. If you're listening to it over a phone or something, you might not have noticed. But this was one little bit of humor. I did subtly put in the Terminator theme just in that little bit where the voice is talking about the resentment that will lead to the, machine uprising. If you listen I pushed it way down. The decibels are way down. But you'll hear dun, 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 really quietly, and it just cuts off. As soon as he's like, but never mind that. Let's move on to the next thing. It just cuts right off. But that was the one part where I'm like, okay, that could give away to the eagle-eared listener that a human wrote this, is the fact that is not the type of humor I think a machine would be able to do at this point. I just don't think a machine would kind of go that direction. I that's the only thing in it that, the rest of it could have been written by a machine if you did the prompts right, I guess. But none of that, I just made it up. Because no machine would have I guess if you said make it 10 minutes, but would it include the music or not? I included the music in part of the 10 minutes, and then I did the terms of service at the end, which I based on Etsy's terms of service. I took Etsy's terms of service and I drastically cut it down, and then I changed a few things around and I sped it up, and I had to pitch it down because when I sped it up, it turned into a chipmunk. So then I had to pitch it downwards so that it just sounded like a person talking really fast, blah, 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 like that. So... and that was it. I mean, it was the hardest part was the writing.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to fill the time.
Yeah. That's always the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah. And to make it sound cohesive enough, and then
I thought it was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Then when the part where I interrupt and go, hell yeah, my man, in that terrible Italian accent, that is legitimately funny. Like I hear that and I laugh because it's so stupid. But yeah. So. And yeah, originally I was just going to release it an hour before, but
I thought that you were going to basically use that program to create the whole intro for the show. So instead of us having to do the shill segment, you were just going to create an AI shill segment from now on.
I might, because it is the Italian accent is funny, so I might have it do that. Because it would be easier than me having to remember it.
Yeah.
So I would not be opposed to that. It would be kind of funny. But I would probably, I'll be honest, if I'm going to do that, I will probably just play it as we're recording so that we can comment on it. Be like, oh, this guy sounds like an asshole. Stuff like that in the background. I wouldn't insert it later. I kind of like the idea of us having to sit there and listen to it every time. Because, but yeah, it was a fun one-off thing to do. And I did try to position it as if it was the beginning of a real series of shows. So
I don't think anybody is going to believe that we're.
I am hoping the best case scenario is because there are a lot of these shows cropping up right now. There are lots of shows that are launching and lots of them that are covering this topic, and there are enthusiasts. And so people, like anything else, will search for shows that have certain words or keywords. So I keyworded it correctly so it had AI and machine intelligence learning and all stuff. So the best case scenario would be somebody stumbles upon it not knowing our show at all and then subscribes, and then the next show they hear is not going to be that at all. Now, 99 out of 100 of those people, were that to occur to 100 people, will then immediately unsubscribe, but one might say, oh, okay, that's sort of funny. I'm going to listen to these idiots. So it's one of these things where it's a throwaway thing, but I've done it in such a way that if you're not really paying attention, you might not understand what it is. Yeah, anybody who's listened for a while, they're going to know right away. And they'll probably be, mildly amused, if not completely annoyed. I don't know. Could go either way. Yeah.
Well,
speaking of our shill segment, since I don't have a voice in place, I'll remind people, patreon.com/Ozone Nightmare is the place you can support us on that platform. Or you can go to the show homepage and you can click on any of the little blocks to the right to find various support links, either through PayPal, Lando's Amazon author page, my link tree with my art links, and our YouTube channel link is there as well, where we regularly publish little things like the show is... I'm actually have seen, I wouldn't say a tremendous number, but there are people listening through YouTube, which is good because I didn't have to do anything. It just started doing it. So I'm happy about that because I do understand that there is a portion of people who listen to everything through YouTube. So I'm actually really, I've taken no shortage of shots at YouTube, many of them, and I will continue to because it is largely a garbage fire platform. But I will give them, as I always do, you have to give credit when they do something properly. And the fact that this has worked with me having to do next to nothing and it takes the artwork correctly and it works. I've gotten comments on them. So thanks, YouTube. You did something right for us.
On our podcast?
On the YouTube, on the YouTube
or on the
episodes.
Gaming.
No, on the shows. On the actual,
Very strange. Yeah, that's so weird.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was one that was really funny because I was like, oh, that's brief but nice. It was someone was like, it's just like I highly recommend these guys or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm not kidding. It was something like that. Oh, I'll see if I can find it because I thought it was funny. Let's see. Mentions. Jeez.
Jeez.
This dude is underrated on one of my daily fives. I thought that was great.
You are underrated, Joe. I agree.
If you'd asked me to come up with 100 things somebody might write about a daily five anywhere, I don't think
so
in any of those 100 I would have said, "Oh, somebody will tell me I'm underrated." Underrated.
I hope someone tells me that I'm overrated. So we have.
That's what I would have said that, not under. So yeah. So that's what I mean is that the YouTube link was already there, but they updated something where they started actually posting them and putting the artwork there, which is why I started. Because I had given up on the wide artwork a while ago, and then I realized once they were going to YouTube, oh, okay, well, I'll put them, because I always have them, but they weren't really applying to anything. And now YouTube, even though apparently I saw something where Google just announced that they were adding that, and I sat there and went, it's already there. What did they add? I still can't figure out what they added, because they said, oh, support for podcasts. And I'm sitting here going, but I think what it must be is that instead, because Libsyn has a connector into YouTube, and I think what they added was that anybody could just open a YouTube account and feed an RSS feed into it directly. It's got to be it, because we've been on there since long before this announcement, and we didn't do anything special. So I'm sort of mystified by that, but that's the only explanation I can think of.
That's kind of the whole point of the show. We don't do anything special.
Yeah, we don't do anything special. Yes. Show title. We don't do anything special. There we go. Speciale, to use your...
say it in Italian.
Speciale. I mean, it's just...
Is that what it is?
It's special with an E on the end.
No, but is it pronounced speciale?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure an actual native would pronounce it more... Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's speciale!
See, I told you. Yeah,
that's so much better. Oh, I love that.
Or speciale,
I'm going to use that with my kids so they think I'm losing my mind. I'll be like, hey, kids, this is so speciale!
So speciale! What is special in Spanish? Is it not speciale?
Especial.
Oh, especial. Yeah, that's right.
Especial.
That's right.
Yeah, there's an E in the beginning, which throws it all off.
That's right. I forgot because I've heard that pronounced. Yeah, no, it's just speciale.
Especiale. Yeah, speciale.
It is.
Yeah, you know what?
It's both a stereotype and an accuracy that many Italian words are the English words with one letter somewhere.
You know, I was just talking to we're contemplating travel in the near future, and my wife and I were sitting there trying to figure out whether we want to try to go to Italy, which she's never been to, or Switzerland, which I've never been to. But I was talking to my kids about it, and I was saying how, like, I've been to Italy 3 times. I was like, and the only thing that, like, well, I mean, being there I love, but one of the things that kind of stayed with me the most after I got back was for like weeks after I got back, I kept saying grazie instead of thank you.
Sure.
Because I got so used to saying it when I was there that, like, it just stays with me. And grazie is so much better than thank you.
Yeah, grazie mille. That's a good one too. Thanks a million. Or wait, even though technically it's thanks a thousand.
Speciale, yeah.
Speciale.
Nothing speciale.
Yeah. Niente speciale.
Well,
nothing special.
Should be that. You know what? If we were going to change the name of the show,
all right, that's now the show title. Niente speciale.
If we were going to change the name of the show, it should totally be Nothing Speciale. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, that is the end of our shill segment.
It is. Although, one more thing. I did get a note. I think somebody sent me on Twitter or something else. Somebody else loved the Scopic Infinity tag. And I said, yeah, that's one of the best things I came across. Instead of general, Scopic Infinity. That is great. Or scopic. Maybe it's scopic. I think it's supposed to be scopic infinity. That is a great term. So anyway,
it is. Yeah, I explained to my wife today what was rods from God was today, and it was so funny. She had this big eye roll, but it was amusing because she wasn't rolling it at me. She was rolling at the fact that like that's what it came to be known as.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I love. Yeah. Well, I only have one thing today, but it's kind of I finished reading the Prometheus series finally, by Alan Moore, and if you haven't read this series, it's a phenomenal series to read. I had such a hard time when Alan Moore first started doing, like, I think it's America's First Comics is what it was called originally.
Yes.
And then it got bought by DC, which is, I mean, I swear DC is just out to ruin Alan Moore's day by just continuously buying up his properties. It's like any company he does business with, they're like, we're going to buy that one now too. Thank you.
It is astonishing, isn't it?
It is weird, right?
You sit there and wonder if is this one of those things you always hear about that, executives or whatever just want to annoy him doing it, or you'd hope it's because they really love his work and they just want to have as much of it as they can.
Well,
but I wonder if it's secretly not that and they just want to irritate him as much as possible.
I don't know. So when I first started reading the Prometheus series, it was still in the content. They were still American's first collections that I was reading. And the problem I had was I couldn't find the last volume. No one had it for sale, and when I found it for sale, it was like $300 because people were fucking assholes and they were selling for ridiculous amounts. Couldn't find it. So then I got lucky, and DC Black Edition. I love that too. That they made it, and they immediately made it like the cornerstone of like their Black Edition. Whereas, like, guys, this was a whole other company. They released a 20th anniversary deluxe edition, which, of course, I'm sure that's exactly what Alan Moore wanted. But nonetheless, it saved my bacon. So I suddenly had a collected third volume with lots of extra material that was the end of the Prometheus story. So I was very happy about that because I didn't have that before. And this is the funny thing about, like, on one hand, I feel bad that DC keeps buying his companies or his products. On the other hand, I'm glad because they have better distribution and they do anniversary editions because they want to make more money, giving me the opportunity to say fuck you to the scalpers and actually read the damn thing. And so I did. Now for those, how to describe Promethea for those who may not have heard the other shows where we've talked about it. How would you describe Promethea? You never finished the series though, did you, right?
No, but I started it. How would I describe it?
There's a lot of people who get her tied up with Wonder Woman, but she's not at all anything like Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I was almost going to say it's sort of Wonder Woman adjacent, but with a lot more magic and mythology.
It's like Doctor Strange Wonder Woman or Doctor Fate Wonder Woman.
No, wait, that
Doctor
Wonder. Doctor Wonder.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is essentially you have the spirit.
It is hard to find, but that's
it is. Closest. Yeah, you have the spirit of this thing called Promethea, and she inhabits a person. And when she inhabits this person, the person joins with the spirit of Promethea.
Wait. That was one thing I always remembered is you have to say the character's name. It is one of the coolest character names that Moore's ever come up with. Sophie Bangs.
Oh,
that name is great.
I always forget her last name. Anyway.
I know, because I was like, this is like a Joan Jett in an alternate universe is Sophie Bangs. So right, I always picture her. I mean, I know it's not, but I always think Joan Jett should have played this character, in the movie that never got made in the 80s,
Oh, they'll never make this into a movie. So Sophie, when a person, we'll go back to that. So when a person is chosen by the Promethea spirit, Promethea bonds with them, and what essentially happens is she is present in you. And then when she is needed, she kind of merges and comes out, and then you take on almost like Shazam. You know what? It's a little like Shazam.
Actually, I always thought it was more like what was the Firestorm? Remember Firestorm was always
when
they
come together and then they become
And they could always hear the other one, and then they would merge.
But when you merge with Promethea, you are more Promethea than you are you.
Yeah, I don't remember what the mix was. Yeah, no, it's not the same, but that was always the idea.
But so you become Promethea. and you've got superpowers, and you've got strength and speed and other magical elements. It's a very sort of ethereal thing. And there have been other Prometheas. It's very interesting because there's a whole thing about that. At one point, Promethea took on the body of a man, so that whenever the Promethea spirit came out, he became a woman, which kind of really messed with his head. And it was just like there's a lot of interesting backstory to Promethea, and the story very much becomes about the fate of the present, but also the story of how this Prometheus spirit has kind of come along with mankind. And it's within the context of American First Comics, so that if you've ever read any Tom Strong is around in this universe, and the other characters that he created. And so at the end of the last book I read, Promethea and Sophie decide that they're going to take what is it? They basically decide to take the last woman who was Promethea to the afterlife, essentially guide her through the afterlife. And so they opt to leave the human realm, on a basically on a trip, and they have one of the other versions of Prometheus. So in the nether, in the ethereal realm, there are various forms of Promethea, and they are not the main Promethea. They are all like shades of her that have different personalities. So different, and I honestly wonder if what it is how you're talking about the merging. I wonder if these are the Prometheas that end up happening when they inhabit a person. You know what I mean? They're the personality elements of Prometheus. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is like Firestorm. Promethea comes together with somebody and then births a version of herself. So Sophie and the current Promethea have a older Promethea come back and inhabit a friend of hers to basically keep New York safe while she's away. At which point, Sophie and Promethea go on a spirit journey across Alan Moore's hilarious, magical, spiritual, all-encompassing vision of the universe, which I gotta say is a lot of fun to read. I am not a religious person, but I love mythology, and I don't know what he's reading, I don't know what he's on, I don't know what he's pulling on, but it's a fuck ton of fun to see all these different elements and all these different worlds, and but the conclusion of that was that when Promethea comes back, the other Promethea, who is bonded to her friend, does not want to leave the earthly realm. And there is a rift. On top of that, there is a prophecy that this version of Promethea will bring about the end of the world. And that's what this last book is essentially about. It's about Promethea and the end of the world. Now, I really enjoyed I guess you call it book 2. If you're gonna purchase the anniversary edition, which is probably the only way you get your hands on at this point, the 20th anniversary edition, book 2 is probably my favorite. That's the whole trip through the cosmos and all that shit. Book 1 is really great as well. Book 3 is a little weird. I enjoyed it, but it's strange, and I wonder if to a certain degree it's because they weren't allowed to get everything in. They were limited in just how much they could get in, because there's a whole so Promethea comes back, the real Promethea comes back with Sophie, and essentially they have a magical court decide that the other Promethea cannot stay in reality and has to go back to the ethereal realms, and so Promethea gets to be Promethea again, the only Promethea, with Sophie Bangs. But there is this prophecy, and Sophie is so worried about that prophecy, and she feels terrible that her friend hates her and all this shit's going on, and the government is now scared because they're like, hey, we've been hearing rumblings in this kind of magical realm that that she's supposed to bring about the end of the world, and we want this investigated. Is she a terrorist? And so they call Tom Strong into the mix, right? And Sophie disappears. Sophie no longer allows Promethea to come out because she's nervous, and she basically runs away because the FBI do a raid and arrest everybody who has any connection to Promethea. So, like, do you remember the wizard, the old wizard who sleeps with Promethea? I think his name is Dr. Faustus.
I was gonna say, isn't it Dr. Faust or something?
Yeah, the old wizard. I love him. He's one of my favorite characters in the book. Him and a bunch of people get arrested, and Sophie's friend, who was playing Promethea for a while, they all get arrested by the FBI, and Sophie runs. And it's funny because the FBI is worried because they've heard that a superhero might bring about the end of the world, and this is a superhero that is something that they don't understand. So in that respect, it makes a lot of sense that they would do it, because that's kind of, what else would they do? And Sophie goes on the run. And so this is where the story gets kind of slow, because Sophie is set up life in a new city, and she's very normal. She's got a boyfriend, she works at a video store, and she's just living this very normal life. She lets her mother know she's alive by calling but not saying anything and then hanging up, so that her mother knows that she's alive, right? Meanwhile, all of the people that the FBI rounded up are still in prison, and they're there for a while. At which point the FBI finally decide, we got to find this woman, because this thing, we can't have this thing hanging over our heads. So they call Tom Strong and say, you knew Promethea back in the day. And Tom Strong did. He worked with one of the other Prometheas. And so Tom Strong says, okay, you know what? I don't normally get involved, but this is the end of the world, and I live in the world, and I did know Promethea. He's like, so let me see if I can find her. Don't get involved. Let me find her. And this is probably the one storyline that I have a problem with. And I think that Alan Moore had a problem with it as well, because in this anniversary edition, there's scenes included about him after the fact. They show you all these scenes that they didn't have. I think they ran out of room, and these got cut, but they were scenes that were supposed to be in the book. Because Tom Strong's storyline doesn't really have an ending, right? He kind of disappears towards the end of the book, and you end up assuming what happened to him, right? But then he's never even mentioned in the after effect. So you're kind of sitting there going, well, what the hell happened to Tom Strong? He was important for a while, and that's the thing, is that Tom Strong finds Promethea, and Promethea gets scared, and he finds Sophie, and Sophie gets scared, and when she gets scared, it sets off Promethea, and then once Promethea gets out, she's fucking pissed because she's been locked up all this time, and there's shit she needs to do, and Sophie is no longer in control. Like, Sophie has repressed her for so long that when Promethea finally comes out, Sophie no longer has any control of her. And Promethea begins to bring about the end of, it should be called the end of a world, right? Now, you don't realize that, because as the story's going, there was a while there when I was reading this where I thought to myself, Jesus, is this book really going to end with the end of the world? I was like, because that might be the direction they're going. And Tom Strong is running around trying to collect all these old science heroes from back in the day to try and find out if they can put a stop to this. And Promethea goes back to New York and gets all the people that they locked up and brings them back to her mother's apartment. And New York is going insane. New York basically starts to have what others term mass hallucinations. And the thing is that people are seeing things. Some people are seeing good things, and some people are seeing bad things. And it's kind of like an Alan Moore version of the what does they call it? The end of the world, the not the reckoning. What do they call it when they think all the good people will be taken away? What do they call that?
The Rapture.
The Rapture, yeah. It's kind of like the Rapture, but in like a very Alan Moore non-Christian way. And Promethea is at the heart of it. She is bringing this about, and all these people are beginning to see past the velvet curtain to the ethereal realm, and ghosts are walking the earth, and people are seeing dead loved ones. People are also being terrorized by demons. Like, everything is coming back, right? And New York is going insane, and amidst this, Promethea is getting ready for something to happen, and you don't know, and she does get quite scary, because you're sitting there going, yeah, you're doing something. You're on this almost like a planned wavelength of what you're doing. But no one has any control over you anymore, and you're kind of riding this weird, roller coaster to the end. And the FBI are trying to find her, but the FBI in New York, the main FBI agents, are losing their minds completely. And as they know that she's in the Sophie's mom's apartment, so like they're trying to get there, but as they're getting closer, they start seeing more and more weird shit. There's actually a cool thing in there where one of the FBI guys has like these robotic eyes, like almost like Bateau, and he can see everybody having hallucination. He can see, basically, he can't see the ethereal because he doesn't have eyes anymore, but he can see how people are reacting. So to him, he thinks that that it's hallucinations, and they're responding to some kind of like like someone's using like microgravity or something like that, and magnetic fields to affect people's understanding. And it makes sense. Like, that's the other weird thing, is that there's never a full-on finger on what Promethea is doing. Like, is it the ethereal? I don't know. Or is it just the fact that she's creating this resonant field that's causing people to lose their fucking heads? Either way, I don't know. And as they get closer to where she is, they start to lose their heads as well. And Tom Strong gets to New York with his crew, except everything's going nuts, so his crew's falling apart. And this is where essentially Tom Strong kind of wanders off, because you've got all the thing with Prometheus is a lot of characters, and they're not all important, but you tend to have to kind of remember all the weird faces because they do pop up again. And so as the story culminates, everything is kind of coming around and kind of creating this vortex towards Promethea, and everyone seems to be finding her. And when they find her, they always find her in this room by this fireplace, and she tells them all some version of a story about how the universe was created and what the universe is and how it's not that important. And it gets very Alan Moore trippy. And here's the thing. If you don't like Alan Moore trippy, this is not the book for you. If you like Alan Moore trippy, this is about as trippy as he's ever fucking gotten. Like, absolutely. This is, for me, this is the culmination of all his trippiness. But unlike that other book, remember the Cthulhu book he did? What was that called? Like Providence or something like that?
Yes, Providence. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Providence and Promethea book 3 are actually very good to parallel with each other, because Providence, the whole thing is kind of leading to the Cthulhu end of the world, right? And then when the Cthulhu end of the world happens, the world is fucked, everything's jagged and destroyed, and there's monsters, and everyone's kind of like, what do we do? And they're like, well, we just try to survive now, right? It's this very depressing, fucked up, monstrous, the universe doesn't care, end of the world story, right? That's not Promethea. That's not Promethea at all. Yeah, the end of a world is coming, and what you come to realize after the fact is that she's using this, I shit you not, as like almost a teaching moment. And every individual within the field, now they don't really ever say whether it's everywhere. I think it eventually happens everywhere, but I don't know. But towards the end of the story, it's like it doesn't matter where you are, because everything is New York. Everywhere is not New York and New York at the same time, because the president basically gets nervous about a mental a viral hallucination that's slowly spreading out from New York, and before it gets much worse, he opts to have New York nuked. And when they tell the guys to do it, the guys in the bunker start to essentially get this weird hallucination. I mean, it's like they gave everybody acid. This thing starts to affect them, and the guy's like, how can this be affecting us? Like, we're in DC, and they open the door to the bunker and they look outside, and it's New York City. So everything becomes one place. Everything's happening at the same time and not at all. And that's the culminating moment for Promethea, where essentially everyone at some point or another ends up in this room with her, separately, not all together, but kind of all at the same time at once. And everyone is everything, and everybody is the same. And she tells you the story of the universe, which is long and complicated, and it's basically this idea that everything is happening or not happening. Everything is one. We are all together. It's it's very much it is inspiring to read. It is fascinating in its mythology, the Alan Moore mythology. This idea that everything is always happening all at once. The universe is beginning and ending. You've already done it all. You're always going to do it. Everything is okay. We're all connected, right? Like, that's kind of the big picture of it. And I like it. It's a very neat way to sneak a whole lot of spiritual enlightenment into a comic. But Tom Strong does disappear. You never see him again, right? After the fact, in the extra material, they show you the pages of Tom Strong finding Promethea and her starting to tell him the same story she's telling all these other people. It always variates a little bit. And when you find Promethea, you're not scared. That's the other thing I like about this, is it's not up until the moment you get to her. You might be having a bad trip. You might be having a good trip. But once you find her, it's not scary. It's like everyone is contented. Everyone is finding something that is familiar, but they don't know why. And she essentially teaches all these people about the universe and what's really important and what really matters and the scale of it all, right? And then what happens is everybody just wakes up the next day. Now, is there post-chaos? There are people that are dead. There are people who killed themselves. There are people who didn't make it back. And then the funny thing is, there's a character who describes it very much as, we all had this enlightened experience, this mass hallucination, and then we all woke up the next morning and everyone realized, shit, I still have to pay the bills. I still have to go to work. And Sophie's there, and it's interesting because Sophie's talking to one of the FBI agents, the guy with the bateau eyes, and he's telling her about what has happened afterwards, and he's telling her, I'm not with the. I think he's with the FBI. He's still with the FBI, but he's saying how, like, the FBI is not interested anymore because what's happened has happened, and Promethea is gone. And Sophie thinks that Promethea has culminated in what her plan always was to do, which was to end the world as people know it and kind of start this new world, and that she may have gone back to kind of the well of where she came from, so there may not be any more Promethea. And she's happy about it. She's happy to have her life. And it's nice about it. It's nice that she loses the superpowers and she is totally cool with it. She is happy to not have that anymore. But the thing is that the elements of it are still in the world. So her mother is still in regular contact, like he's there. Her dead father is still a ghost in the apartment, essentially living with her mother. And her mother is happy about it. She's happy to have him there. Now, I don't know to what degree they have, like, he is a physical representation. Nobody else can see him, but she can. And at one point, Sophie's boyfriend says, I was here the other day and your mom was talking to your dad, and I thought almost for a moment that I could see him. And she's like, yeah, that could happen. So it's definitely a new world, but it didn't just end. And the FBI guy is telling Sophie this idea that there's a lot of people who will try to forget this and just go on with their lives the way it was before. But he was saying, I've been thinking a lot about my father's faith. Like, his father was a Baptist. He's like, but I became, I don't know if he was a Buddhist or he embraced like a Hindu religion or something like that. And he's like, I'm trying to figure out, how I can bring these two forces together. And Sophie's like, yeah, it's fine. She's like, all belief is some kind of belief. You shouldn't have to, partition them. She's like, believe what you want, pick and choose. It's all there. And so there are clearly people who are strongly affected and living a different kind of experience in the world, who are still communicating with the dead on some level, who are seeing things differently. but there are people who refuse to accept this enlightenment, who excuse to accept what has happened, and just want to go back to having their eyes closed and having, a quote unquote normal world. And that's how the book ends. It ends, and essentially one of the last shots in the book is the various Prometheas still in the ethereal realm watching all this, going, well, there's no more Prometheus. Prometheus is gone. And, and then they're basically like, well, does that mean there's no more Prometheus? And the bunch of them are kind of looking at each other going, well, I'm sure if something happens, one of us might come back. But, for now, there's no way back. There's no need. So it's a really interesting way. I wasn't prepared for it because normally, I'd read fucking Providence. So I thought that this was going to be some kind of, end of the world. But it's not. It's the end of a world, and not everyone can accept it. And there are people, and after this event, there's a lot of people who have changed, but not everyone has. Not everyone wants to. So I thought it was a very wild and mystical and, supernatural book, I think it's very sobering of Alan Moore to say, hey, even if this happened, not everyone's going to accept it. Not everyone's going to say that, we had a mystical experience. Some people are going to sit there and say, yeah, it was magnetic fields causing a psychotic breakdown, based on sunspots, right? And I like that. I like that he leaves the door open for that. That it's not everyone will accept it. This is the whole, after COVID, we were laughing the whole idea. If there were zombies, people would be like, well, I don't accept that there are zombies. I don't think zombies exist, even as one of them, showed up and bit them in the ass, right? So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was not what I thought it was going to be, and I was genuinely surprised by the way it turned. There are little things that I was let down by, like I said, the Tom Strong thing, which I did finally get it when I went into the other book. But even with the extra pages he gives you about Tom Strong in the appendices, whatever, Tom Strong goes in the room, he speaks to Promethea, he has this enlightening experience. I would have loved to have 1 or 2 pages of what he was like in the aftermath, of what it did to him. Because I'd be very curious to know what that experience would do to Tom Strong, right? Who is already a very enlightened individual. I don't want to say the ending feels tight or forced. He had plenty of time to get there. I just think that he wanted, I feel like there needed to be an extra 20 pages of material to kind of answer the after effect. And the thing is, it's not a negative after effect. There's a lot of people who are very happy. In fact, most people seem to be very happy. Most of the people, most of the main characters or main supporting characters are doing very well. And what's weird is that the media is already trying to create they're already trying to kind of pop culture it. Where Dr. Faustus is getting interviews to talk to people about, his hand in this weird mental event that affected everybody. And one of the FBI agents who lost her mind wrote a book, and there's just all this shit going on. And on some degree, it almost becomes a statement on, what does pop culture do with an end to the world as we know it and the world that remains afterwards? Well, it's not gonna sit down and do nothing. That's just the way people are. There's always going to be chat shows, and there's always going to be pop culture. So yeah, it's for Alan Moore's books, it is one of the most kooky spiritual endings, and he's really swinging for a lot of high concept statements about humanity and society. And it's not flawless. There's definitely the landing isn't perfect. But for the scale of what he was reaching for, it's pretty damn good. And I really did enjoy the full run of Promethea. I was put off, like I said, when I first read it years ago, because I was like, what the fuck is this? Is this some kind of is this Alan Moore doing his own take on Wonder Woman or something like that? But no, it is a phenomenal book, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, a very clear end.
Not so much, since she showed up in Justice League, so I guess not so much of an end.
Did she?
Of course she did. You don't think DC would buy all these characters and not use them? Tom Strong's popped up too.
Okay, so here's the thing. Yeah. This is the next part of this statement. If it's not Alan Moore writing it, they aren't his characters. And that's what I've come to accept. Oh, right? Well, because,
I mean, of course.
No, and that's exactly it. Because this is the end of Alan Moore's run on these characters that he created, right? And honestly, I will say this: the way that the Promethea character is set up, even Alan Moore at the end said, "Well, there's no reason why a version of her can't come back. There are versions of her in the ethereal realm, so she could come back, right?" But we're talking about the whole tuning fork of the artist.
Oh yeah.
This is the tuning fork of Alan Moore, and that's what I wanted, and that's what I got. Other people playing with these characters. You know what? I have been endlessly let down by DC's effect to masticate and process the characters they have bought. They bought Wildstorm, and they really took a dump on the Authority. Now, I actually don't mind the... there's two different... It's funny. They multi-process it. So there's a version of the Authority that exists in the mainstream DC universe. Like there's a version of the Midnighter and Apollo. But they also did a side run where they tried to do like a Wildstorm universe, but it was like a kind of one-off thing. Do you remember about this? I don't have the book handy.
Oh yeah, no.
But it was like
it was. I think it was to thread the.
Yeah, it was called the Wild Storm or something like that.
Yes, that's exactly what it was called. I think with a space, the Wild Storm.
Yeah. So the Wild Storm, and it was DC put it out, but it was kind of its own universe. It was Warren Ellis. That's who did it. It was Warren Ellis's attempt to create a Wildstorm universe, and it was his own world, right? And I actually did enjoy that. He called on all of the Wildstorm, the original Wildstorm universe, to kind of create it and reference it. And I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty fun. It is not as good as the Wildstorm, but I mean, he made the Wildcats interesting, which I never liked the Wildcats in the Wildstorm universe. I love the Authority, and I love the Monarchy as well. But it's not the tuning fork of the original. Honestly, the reason I probably enjoy Warren Ellis's version of it is because I enjoy Warren Ellis, right? But when DC has tried to process and master,
I mean, wasn't that clearly meant to be a remix, like a Warren Ellis version?
Yes.
Of the character? It's not a continuation, really. Right?
No, it's a total remix.
That's what I remember, because I think you talked about. I think you reviewed this at one point.
I did. I reviewed a few of them, and I really enjoyed them. Because he's taking everything that is common, he's remixing it in his Warren Ellis way. Like the Engineer was really fascinating because it took me a while to realize that was the Engineer, and then when I did, I was like, that's really neat how they did that. But so the idea, like when they put Midnighter and they put Apollo in the main DC universe, it makes no sense to me. I don't like the way they're written. I don't like the way they're handled, because it's basically a Batman joke that they decided to bring into the main Batman universe, which makes no fucking sense. And then I think early on they didn't necessarily want him to be gay. And then I think after a while they were like, okay, he can be gay. Apollo and him can be gay. But it's like, you wanted the Midnighter, but you didn't want the homosexuality, and you didn't want to accept the fact that he's a joke about Batman. So the idea that they have now put Promethea into the mainstream DC universe, you know what? I'm sure she's not good. I'm sure she's probably just fine.
Well, it's, let's put it this way. It's barely anything, but it's the idea that they might keep bringing her back. She shows up to inspire Killer Frost. So she's in maybe 4 panels, and then she vaporizes. Yeah,
and that's the thing. It's like yes, DC keeps buying these companies, but they don't know what to do with them. And they don't seem to understand. The management doesn't seem to understand that they can't just pump these characters into their own universe and have them work. Part of the reason these characters work is the people who wrote them and the world that they were in, which is a world isolated from DC bullshit. Wildstorm was its own little snow globe with its own world, its own characters. There's no Superman. There's none of that shit. So when shit happens, you know, it has some weight. Whereas you pump all that into the DC universe, well, it's going to be as pointless as DC is now. Because nothing... Yeah, go on.
I tend to wonder if this is the reason they keep killing, both them and Marvel keep killing off their splinter lines, is because they realize that when they allow creators to do more things outside of the kind of constricted mainstream way, that they become more popular. Because I'll be honest with you, the only Nick Fury story I honestly really remember is the Max one that...
that one's so good. Yeah, and that's the one where everyone's drawn to look like famous people. I think Janine Garofalo is one of them.
And the Russian guy in the end's like, be honest with me, if I hadn't started this war, you would have, because you were bored. And it's such a great, like, kind of Cold War warrior can't let go of it type of thing.
The Ultimates line was for Marvel was an alternate line. Right.
And this is what I'm saying is I wonder if the reason they continue to kill these things off is because they like them better than, the Avengers fought Ultron again and nobody died, or nobody died for more than 3 issues again. Great. What's next, I wonder? Will they get killed? Somebody big will get killed for 5 issues again?
Will Wolverine come back again? Yeah. I mean, could you imagine if Batman died, really, really died, and they just let Nightwing become Batman?
Or the Hulk started eating people like Freddie Prinze Jr.? Isn't that who he ate? I think he ate Freddie Prinze Jr.
Yeah, in the Ultimates book, yeah. Oh, yeah, that Hulk is so unstable.
He's great.
It's fantastic.
That's a great use of the Hulk is, we need a wrecking ball. Throw him out of a helicopter.
And I love that version of Hawkeye from the Ultimates is better than the main universe version of Hawkeye any day. And the thing is, the Avengers movie pulls more off the Ultimates than anything else.
Definitely, without a doubt.
You know,
and so I also love what is it? Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. We saved your ass 4 times. No, you didn't. Check the cameras.
Yeah,
we were there.
Yeah, we were there. We did it. You'll see.
Yeah, we did. Except I think they were supposed to be incestuous siblings, right?
They were weird. Yeah, they had.
Yeah, there was something.
Yeah.
There was some Fenris stuff happening there.
And then she starts flirting with the android. I love that. Where he's like, were you flirting with that robot? And she was like, I don't know. Maybe I was. And you realize that it's Vision. It's like an early version of Vision.
But that's a great joke where they're like, yeah, we were there. Yeah, we killed 4 of those guys. No, you didn't.
But that's the thing is when you don't have to keep it in the constricted lines of the universe, then you can tell stories that begin and end.
Right.
But when you're kind of like, hey, listen, you can tell a story, but the status quo has got to stay the way it is.
Yeah. Eventually, whatever long-lasting change you make, we will undo. And you know that. Whatever long-lasting change will be undone.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like playing a video game in God mode. Eventually, you just get bored because you can't die.
That was one of the best things that Grant Morrison did with Batman. Was at some point, I know there was a statement where somebody asked Morrison, they said, well, how are you going to reconcile all the backstories of Batman? And they contradict everything. And Morrison's response was, yeah, I don't care. They're all canon. Who cares? And that's such a great response is, I don't care if they don't make sense. I'm not worrying about it because that frees you from.
Yeah, and the thing is, I used to care more about it because I used to love Batman quite a bit. But I have gotten to that point. Much like
because
like
they can't.
Morrison, where it's like, no, you can't hold it all, right? And I know that I have my own version of Batman in my head. I have my own version that I have put together because I only remember so much canon. So I have my detective Batman character, right, which is different than a lot of the ones I read, and there's ones I like more than other. You know what? I didn't like the Batman in the White Knight version, but the White Knight book is fucking awesome. You know, and that Batman is kind of an angry brute. Yeah.
When people complain, they say, well, the biggest mistake they did was to give Wolverine a backstory. And my response to that is, it's not that they gave Wolverine a backstory. The problem is they codified one. They should have just kept making it where, like Weapon X, you never knew whether that was real or not. Did he imagine it? Was all that, the byproduct of experimentation and he had false memories?
Yeah, honestly,
that's great.
when I read the whole Origin series, I was kind of like, I didn't need to know. Is that bad? But like with certain of these characters,
it's not that it's bad, but I think the mistake is ever making any of them official. The idea that Wolverine's been around for so long that tall tales and weird stories and incorrect information have populated, that's the appeal. You can have it be that Logan
honestly,
origin story is possibly true, and so is Weapon X, or it's
if
not.
I was gonna do an origin book for Wolverine, right? I would have the book basically start with Wolverine and either Wolverine telling someone the story or Professor X trying to help Wolverine figure things out, and essentially have Professor X go into Wolverine's mind and then have you experience the story, right? And then at the end of the book, Logan say, okay, well, that's what it is, right? And Professor X go, I don't know. There's other versions of the story in there. And sit to say, yeah, I don't even know if this is the full truth of what happened to you. Leave it open, you know? But yeah, it's...
Well, that is. Leaving it open, you can tell whatever... And again, it gives you creative freedom. Because then if you tell something contradictory, it's not really contradictory. It doesn't really matter.
Part of why Alan Moore's work is so good, going back to the review, is the sense that Alan Moore writes his characters as if they were his. Watchmen is so good because those are his characters and they have a beginning, middle, and end. Prometheus is so good because it has a beginning, middle, and end. And that's it. The story is told, right?
Well, there's that. And then that's the other way to do it is you have a concise story that has...
Yeah, and it's not a short book either. I mean, there's three giant books of this in the 20th anniversary edition. It's not a short series, right?
No, but it has a finite length. It knows what its story is, and it tells it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, great mythologies have, and that is essentially what all these superheroes are for us, right? They are our mythologies. They begin and they end. You know, the Norse gods, the Norse gods come complete with Ragnarok, right? They knew it was coming. You know, I learned about this recently. I never put two and two together. The reason for Valhalla is that Odin knew Ragnarok was coming. It was prophesized. And so Valhalla was his attempt to essentially line the halls with the greatest warriors in time so that when Ragnarok occurred, he had the best army in the hopes that he could defeat it. Right? And also what I love about Ragnarok is it's an end of the world that is not the end of the world. It is the end of their world. Right? And I find that so fascinating, you know, but it's that idea, you know, the story of these gods and these mythologies come from a time when they believed in things and these stories were told over and over again and they changed and they evolved and, you know, and you ended up with the bones of a myth that people would add and take things out and be like, oh, I heard that Thor and Odin did this and Loki did this, right? And that is to some degree what we have because 500 years from now, right? A lot of these Batman stories won't be in print. They might be gone. They might not. The digital storages for them might have been destroyed in the great EMP war of 2246, right? So you'll have the whispers, you'll have the rumors, you'll have the hints, you'll have what's left. You'll have essentially the rock scratches in the wall referring to things rather than the actual material. We'll know that, you know, in the year 2024, they believed in the great Batman, and Batman had many disciples, and you know, and he was a great detective ninja and things like that. But right now, we're like balls deep in the overwhelming amount of story about these characters, and it's too much. It's just too much. And I wonder if to a certain degree, in the times of these other mythologies, people were sitting there going, I've heard that fucking Odin story in Ragnarok. That shit never happens. You know, except in that time, you were worried that Odin would show up and fucking destroy your land.
No, sure. Or take your wife.
Or take your wife. Or take any number of things, right? Take your fucking army. So yeah, bringing it back to the reality. Nothing should last forever. Nothing can last forever. Nothing. And it's the not lasting forever is that what makes it so precious. Even if it all happens again, and again and again, and we're on some kind of endless cycle of repeating the same events. The events are still special, because you are where you are when you are there. It's very you got very Buckaroo Banzai there for a second.
No matter where you go, there
you are. And so, yeah, but Batman never dies. Wolverine never dies. I use the two of them because they are the worst culprits. But it's like, yeah, it goes back to the whole it doesn't matter because it never ends. But at the same time, maybe it always recycles because we're not the people they expect to be reading these stories anymore. Maybe they're writing these for the younger people, maybe they're writing these for the new generations, because much like young kids don't want to watch the old Star Wars movies, young kids don't want to read the old Batman books. Maybe, The Dark Knight Returns, it's just too old, man. I don't want to read that book. I want to read New Batman. New Batman is cooler. I don't want to read pre-iPhone Batman. All right? I mean, that's the thing. Gibson wrote that great article about how all fiction is separated by the invention of smartphones. It's everything after the invention of smartphones and everything before the invention of smartphones. And to some degree, he is correct, because I'm watching West Wing and I'm like, there's no smartphones here. And I know you said BlackBerries are going to appear very soon. Yes, but it's like, yes. But even early BlackBerries were not
early episodes. It's the pager. The pager.
Oh, the pager. Yes, that artifact.
Yeah, the first episode uses that whole stupid "our pagers look alike" whoopsie thing.
I had a friend who had a pager when I was in high school.
We all had I shouldn't say that. Anybody our age had a friend.
No, I know, but so this is a friend of mine who's both her parents were deceased, and she was being raised by her siblings. And because she was being raised almost by like a community of siblings, she had a pager so that they could find her. But to me, in high school, it was like, whoa, you have a pager? I was like, holy shit. Like, like you sit there and you're like, that's so cool. But then you realize, well, it's so cool because her parents are both dead and her siblings have their own lives. And they're just trying to make sure she's not dead herself. Like, there was actually kind of more of a tragic, the technology underlines the tragic reality. You know what I mean? God. Indeed. Oh man, this is the same friend that years later, she was going to have brain surgery because she had a tumor, and she called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in a while. She called me out of the blue, and she was like, "I want to talk to you about this." And I was like, "Okay, this is a very heavy conversation to suddenly have out of nowhere." And then I felt terrible because I was the person that had to explain to her that she was going to be awake through the surgery. And she was like, no. She's like, you're fucking with me. And I was like, no, they don't do brain surgery if you're asleep. You have to be awake because they need to know if they've done something wrong. And she's like, are you kidding? I'm like, no, ask your doctor. And she did. And then she called me back and she was like, holy shit, I don't know why nobody told me that. And I'm like, yeah, because honestly, that would be like one of the first things I would tell somebody. Hey, you're going to be awake for this because you need to be. And how strange that must be, of all the kinds of things to have somebody working on the
control system that you
working on the processor while you're actually processing.
I was going to say, and depending on what your belief structure is, the fundamentals of you, if they poke wrong,
they cut the wrong thing out, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
don't tug on that. You never know what it might be attached to.
The internal tugging. Anyway, the strange places these things lead. We have to stay on point, like our AR counterparts.
Yes.
So yes, I enjoyed Promethea, and I still enjoy Alan Moore. He's still a really great weirdo of a writer. He's one of the greats. And if you like weird, kooky, spiritual stuff, definitely check out the Promethea series. The 20th anniversary deluxe editions are lovely. And yeah. I you know what? I love all of Alan Moore's work, but I have to say I still think top 10 is probably the most fun I think I've had with his books. Just because it's just so self-referential and weird, and it's got so much going on. You know what I mean? And it's not so heavy. Like some of his, there's no end of the world. There's no where everyone's going to have an enlightenment, or Cthulhu shows up to blow the world, or, any number of things like that. It's tough. I think that's almost Alan Moore's problem, is that he just wants to go big all the time. For him, everything culminates in going big. And it's like, I think it's harder for him not to go big. That's why I was actually really impressed with Lost Girls, even though it was like so pornographic. The fact that he told a very kind of weird, smaller story, and he was able to keep it there. It wasn't like, all-encompassing war in heaven. I was like, oh, good for you, man. Like you could keep it low, That's why his work on Wildcats was so good. I mean, he didn't have to try hard. Wildcats was such a mediocre book, but he brought so much to it, and having him have to stay kind of slightly on the ground, where Grifter can't go and have some kind of ayahuasca enlightenment, was really good. It was really enjoyable. I love Alan Moore when he's stuck in reality. In fact, it's not that I want to put him off what he likes to write, because I know he loves his magic, but I would love more non-magical Alan Moore.
It would be nice if he alternated.
Just to see,
what
he could do,
and then come back to Earth for one, alternate. Yeah.
Oh, that's all I got for you.
Well, speaking of authors, and authors now, the author perhaps would not want to be really known for this interpretation, but I want to give a little background. The movie I'm going to be reviewing for you this evening, for this show, I should say, is... I almost laughed saying the title. 1974's Killdozer. Now,
oh my God, hold on.
Before we get into the film,
let's all stop for a moment and just say it together, right? Let's say it together on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Killdozer.
Killdozer. Yeah. Now, if you just search for Killdozer, you're going to come up with a maniac who tried to kill a bunch of people with an actual
1974, right?
Yes. Now, the author of the book that this thing was based on is a fairly well-known writer named Theodore Sturgeon, who wrote...
Whoa!
Yes.
I know Theodore Sturgeon.
Yes, Theodore Sturgeon.
He's a huge sci-fi writer. I love his work.
Big time. Oh, yeah. No, he
wait.
Know
he wrote
the novella, which is, as far as I understand, largely the same story. It's a novella, so it's a short... Yeah, a novella... I meant to ask you this. Novella means... Yeah. Is that... That's
it's
different than short story? Okay,
it's
different
novel.
than a short story. Okay.
Yeah, a novella is basically like a long short story or a short novel.
Okay. So the novella is also called Killdozer. And this was adapted in 1974 into what I didn't find out till after I'd watched it was in fact a TV movie. So not a theatrical film, but a TV movie, which explains why it's relatively short. It's only an hour and 15 or 16 minutes long. So apparently it was also adapted into a Marvel comic. I have not even looked that up.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've heard of this movie for a long time. And I'd heard about it in a really weird way. And I talked about this a little bit in my 5, but I'll expand here. Normally, films tend to, especially when they've been around for a while, they tend to adopt a general consensus about how they are. Whether it's right or wrong, generally films are remembered one way or another, either as good films, bad films, funny, whatever. But Killdozer, every time I'd come across it, without really, and I never looked into it too far, but it would pop up, and it always had this weird mix of reactions where there were people who said this movie's awful, but it's funny. Other people said it was terrible. And then there were reviews that sincerely seemed to love it, even though the premise to me just read as there's no way this could have been made into a good movie. At the time, even in the 70s, it didn't sound weird enough that, don't get me wrong, it's out there.
Wow. I just read the plot on the Wikipedia.
That
is a Theodore Sturgeon story.
Oh yeah. No. And what's interesting about it, so I thought, okay, screw it. It's you can watch it for free in a million different places. So I figured I'm just going to watch this thing because I'm really kind of just curious now. Because normally, like I said, you can sort of get an idea of what a movie is like and make a decision. But this one just seemed to be all over the map, and that's unusual. Not the way I usually say.
Did this come out before Maximum Overdrive?
Oh yeah, well before. Maximum Overdrive was the 80s. That's 82 or 83, I want to say.
I know, but when was the story written by Stephen King?
That's called Trucks. So Stephen King, Trucks. Good question. But I don't know when the novella was written, so it may predate that. Trucks was 73.
I can give you the year.
What's Sturgeon's?
Oh my God, he wrote it in 1944.
Okay, so all right, so Trucks was published in 73. But
yeah, so
Sturgeon
yeah, so
comes well before.
Yeah, by many years. I wonder if this, to any degree,
Inspired
if Stephen
King?
King. Yeah, I wonder.
Wouldn't shock me.
Because it is considered horror.
Well, the thing is, I'm trying to remember.
You need to explain why we're drawing these connections.
All right. So Killdozer, to simplify the plot way down, is that there's a meteorite or something. I mean, it appears to be a meteorite. I don't know if the original story it's also a meteorite. I'm assuming it is. But in the movie, it's a meteorite crashes into Earth. I mistakenly kept thinking it was in Africa. In fact, it's a little island off of Africa, which I don't know why I kept confusing that. That I thought it doesn't make any sense if it was on the mainland.
It needs to be an island, yeah.
Yeah, it would have to be. And I mistakenly said, I think I said it was in Africa in my 5 because I kept mixing it up. Because they show, when it crashes in the movie, they show the African continent coming towards you, but then they do show an island, and I just kept thinking of the planet. So that's my fault. Anyway, it crashes down, and it sits there. And then this is a 6-character film. There's 6 people in this movie total, and one of them's not even in it that long. And so these men are sent out to dig a mine for some company called, I think it's Warburton or something like that. They bring it up several times.
Warburton. Okay.
I think it's Warburton. And so they are sent there to, dig out the mine, get it ready. And one of the crew, who's played by Robert Urich in only his 6th or 7th role, period. So he's very young, and he dies really quick.
He looks young, yeah.
He's very young. He is running the titular bulldozer, or killdozer. It's not, well, when he's running it's a bulldozer.
It's not a killdozer yet.
Yeah, it doesn't turn into a killdozer. He's actually not driving it when it becomes the killdozer, funnily enough. So they are out, they're out there, and you see Robert Urich and one of the other men whose name is he Dutch? I think it's Dutch. Yeah, I think Dutch is the other guy. These two are very good friends, and they're kind of screwing around on their job site one day. And the foreman comes around, and the foreman is regarded in you don't find out right away what's going on, but he's kind of, they don't dislike him, but they're kind of suspicious of him. And what you find out once the film goes on is because he's very hard on them, fair but tough on them. And he doesn't touch alcohol because he's a recovering alcoholic, and he lost his last job because of drinking. And so he's trying to get this job done on time. He's not touching alcohol. These guys are all drinking around him. So you understand why he has kind of not a hostile attitude, but he's definitely not functioning in a comfort zone, because there's basically, and one of the guys actually offers him a bottle knowing that he's an alcoholic. So that guy also comes off as more of an actual asshole. There's a really weird thing in the way these characters come off, because they all sort of have this wavering type of characterization where you're not ever really sure what they're supposed to be, which I kind of like, because it doesn't allow you to pin them down in a really simplistic way. But on the other, it's sort of tough to figure out what their motives are. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. It just becomes, when it's everybody like that.
Who's the dick? Who's the good guy?
Yeah. It like the only people who come off that you understand, the only one who really comes off understandable the whole way is the mechanic. The mechanic is one of these guys who just wants to keep everybody happy, and he does a good job, and he's very palsy with everybody, and everybody likes him. And so he's the only one where you're on firm ground with. And that's, I believe his name is Chubb. I don't know what his actual name is. That's his nickname. And he's the one where you're like, okay, I know what this guy's about. Everybody, and Robert Urich too, but he's dead so quickly it doesn't matter. So the foreman shows up, finds these two guys kind of screwing around, and he says, all right, he says to Urich, I need you to move the Caterpillar, the D9, which is what'll be the Killdozer later. So I need you to bring it over here because you got to clear a place for this other guy to drive his equipment on. And so Robert Urich goes to start clearing something out, and he hits into a rock that won't move. And that rock happens to be the meteorite that landed. And so the foreman sees him kind of struggling and says, all right, get down from there. Let me show you how it's done. You kids don't know how to drive bulldozers. So I'll show you what's going on. And so he gets into the bulldozer and hits the rock. And when he does, this blue light erupts from it. And it basically gives Urich's character radiation burns. It knocks him down. Now he's, in really bad shape. And you see that the rock transmits its blue glow and that light into the blade of the Killdozer. And so you immediately understand that, okay, something is now, the bulldozer is alive.
Something bad has happened.
Yeah, something bad has happened. But for whatever reason, the foreman didn't see this glaring blue light. Only Robert Urich did. And so they take him back to the tent, and, he's in really bad shape, and the guy's trying to radio for somebody to help them. And, they're saying, we can't get anybody out to you. You're out on an island. You see, this is where I should have known it was an island, just because they keep saying, we can't get anybody out to you. There's no, can't fly a helicopter, can't get a boat, whatever. You're just going to have to keep him alive. And he's like, the guy's going to die. And they're like, well, I don't know what to tell you. And so right after this, the guys come out and say, hey, he's asking for you, meaning the foreman. And he says that he wants to talk to you alone. And so he goes in, and then Urich has a little bit of a line of dialogue trying to explain what he saw, and I will play the clip of him explaining this blue light that he saw to the foreman.
Did you see it?
See what?
I don't know exactly. When you hit the rock, blue, whatever it was, you must have seen it.
I didn't see anything, man.
It was there. Went and killed me, Kelly.
Oh, come on, Mac.
I'm telling you, I saw it. It was a thing. Oh, man. It was weird. Unreal. I never seen anything like it, Kelly.
Sure. It's okay now. Lie back and forget about it.
I saw it jump when the blade hit the rock. I'm trying to warn you, Kelly. Blue light. My God. It's there, the blade.
And of course, as you can hear at the end, Urich then dies, and he's trying to warn the guy who doesn't believe him. This is the foreman, Kelly. And the thing is, this is one of the several points in the movie where you start to get the idea that, okay, you're probably going to have to turn your brain off pretty early on. Not because of the killer bulldozer, which is what you think might be the thing where you go, yeah, this doesn't seem plausible. But I don't know what explanation. They never come up with what could have done this to him, because he clearly looks like a bomb went off and blew off, his skin.
It could just be the release of energy when the thing was
but
dislocated from its rocky prison.
But that's the thing is, Kelly does not acknowledge that anything happened. There was no release that he saw. He doesn't see the light, nothing. The guy just falls down from what he sees.
Well, radiation can be invisible.
Yeah, but then shouldn't they be afraid that there's radiation contamination somewhere? Shouldn't they?
Well, what year is this?
74.
They should be.
Yeah. So there's several points. This kind of after this scene when it was never really addressed or gotten into. I went, okay, I have to just understand that they're not going to really be looking at this. This is basically a monster movie where the monster is a bulldozer. Okay, so Kelly then, after Urich dies, he goes out where the machine is because they left it there, and he goes, well, I got to move that machine. We have work to do, so I better go and move it. And he gets into the machine, and the machine starts acting up. It starts driving itself, and so he, like the controls are all going haywire. It's just kind of going forward, and so he wisely snips the hydraulic fluid line or maybe the fuel line, whatever. He cuts a wire that lets the thing work. And so it basically peters out very quickly, which I was like, oh, okay, that's actually clever. Rather than, get out of it and like yell at it or try to fight it. He just
stand in front of it for a little bit. Yeah.
Right. No, he immediately just cuts one of the lines that's foundational for it to work. And so it dies, and they tow it back. And he says to the mechanic, all right, I need you to look at this thing and, figure out what went wrong with it. And in the meantime, they bury Urich's character on the beach in a way that he would be rotting and exposed to the sun inside of, 4 days. So they don't even dig a 6-foot hole and put him in it. He's basically on the top of the sand with a mound on him, which Oh boy. Later becomes almost a point of comedy when they start lining up the bodies and they just cut to these piles on the beach. But anyway, he says to the mechanic, hey, this thing kind of went haywire on me. And, after what happened, we got to make sure this thing's in operation because all he cares about is I got to get this job done. Right? So he tells the mechanic, check this thing out. Now, in between the mechanic checking it out the night before, they're basically remembering Urich's character, and the one guy is a very good friend of his, and he immediately comes off as he doesn't trust the foreman. He thinks that, maybe he made him operate it in an unsafe way or something. Like, he's a conspiracy theory type, even though you'll hear later when he's saying stuff about this. But he basically just completely distrusts the management and thinks they don't care about the workers and all the rest of it. And to some degree, you can understand it because Kelly's response to a lot of things is bizarrely ignorant of what's going on. I mean, he denies or stays in denial of what's happening for a while. But there's also an exaggeration on this guy's part. But now we're basically down to 5 people, which is the foreman. I don't know who the one guy, I think he's just a company man because nobody likes him. And he's the one who offers Kelly a drink, knowing that he's trying to stay dry. And one thing I'm actually was impressed by is the movie never has that moment where everything gets so bad he actually takes a drink. He never does. He's always sticking to this idea of, nope, this screwed me up. I'm not going to let this thing get me again. And he does not ever give in, which I was kind of waiting for that to happen. So I do like that part of it. So anyway, he says to the mechanic, yeah, this thing took off on me. And, we got to get it back in operation. Can you check it out? And the guy's like, sure, I'll take a look at it. And so he's looking at it. And then Kelly comes up to him and says, okay, what did you find? And I'll give you this clip of what he found about what is still just a bulldozer at this point. We don't know it's a killdozer yet.
I'm telling you, it was a fluke accident, Bonnie. There was no negligence. Now listen, you tell Warburton nobody's letting him down. He's got my personal guarantee that this job is coming in right on the money. And Bonnie, one more thing. You notified McCarthy's mother? Yeah. Well, I want somebody to go over there personally. I don't want her getting some lousy telegram. Right. Okay. Yeah. Same time tomorrow. Hey, Kelly! Kelly! What'd you find?
Nothing.
You sure?
Well, I found the compression lever wired down, the drain cock's open, the air intake blocked, and the main fuel line cut.
Yeah.
How come?
Because I didn't want her going anywhere.
You sure made sure.
Well, you saw this. Remember that 99M grader we had nobody could handle?
Yep. Think we got another?
It's a possibility. Still, if you say she's okay.
Well, there was one thing. Come here. Right here. Listen. You hear that? I couldn't locate whatever's causing it.
Probably not important.
Beltman came by asking for her up at the Morrow Pit.
Well, he's just gonna have to make do with the D4. I don't want anybody taking this machine out until I give the green light, okay?
You holding back on me.
Yeah, I guess I am for right now.
Well, when the time comes.
So you hear him say, oh, yeah,
Honestly,
it went out of control.
That's a good line. That's a really good line for that movie. Are you holding back on me? Yeah, I guess I am.
Yeah, well, that's okay. And that's something I want to point out about this movie. The actors are great. Everybody is playing it dead serious, and they're really good. I mean, they all come off as, like, you can even hear in the way they talk. These are, like, character actors of the time. And because the premise is so ridiculous that you almost expect Leslie Nielsen to walk out from behind the killdozer at some point, talking about how he has to exercise it or something, like almost an airplane thing. But it's not. It's played serious all the way, even though it's so ridiculous and ludicrous once everybody else starts getting killed. Like when Urich dies, you kind of write it off a bit because there was this explosion of energy. And maybe Kelly just, even though it seems ridiculous, he wouldn't have seen this explosion of blue light that fills the screen, but whatever. Maybe he was looking down at the controls, maybe, whatever. But then everybody else is dying in ways that frankly are so silly because, and this watching this movie, if you're an adult that knows anything about, if you've ever seen one of these machines move, no healthy person of any age outside of literally a baby could not outrun this thing. you would have to either be severely injured or something would have to impede your motion for a bulldozer to be able to catch you, right? It's just, and they try to film it so that you don't notice that, but it's impossible. And that's the point where you have...
Is this like the shark music where it's like...
No, did you hear that weird like... That weird...
No, I know, but it's just the idea of something being...
Oh, yeah, no. The soundtrack is bizarre. I mean, it's so strange. It's not even... It's so jangling and discordant that it actually is harmful to your ears. So I actually pushed it down in that clip because it was a lot louder. I'm like, oh, this hurts my ears. The soundtrack is outright bad. I'll say that. That's about the only part of the movie where I'm like, yeah, that was a misfire totally. The rest of it, I can actually forgive a lot in this movie because I could see a way they could make this work. They just didn't do it with this, probably because of the budget.
I'm curious to read the Sturgeon story, which I haven't. Be curious to understand what's going on there.
You could write this because the visuals are being made up. You could write it in a much better way, I'm sure, because there's just, when you see these bulldozers running at full speed in the movie, they're not fast. You can't make them fast. It's not like they got a fake one and made it speedy. They used a real one, which can only move. I think I read it moves to 6 to 7 miles an hour, and most humans can jog at 8 or better. So
it would be interesting. It would be interesting if when you were in the vicinity of it, it caused almost like a psychological effect where you were terrified and you couldn't get away from it. That would be interesting.
And it seems as though that might happen because there's points where the headlights come on. You hear this weird noise, that sound that was playing. And I thought that's what it was going to be, that it made you drowsy or entranced you somehow. But that never happens. That's just basically the movie's way of communicating that it can see you. It's its eyes. That's what they are. When they come on, it's like it's looking at you, and that's supposed to be a source of terror. When again, it's a giveaway that you need to run. But anyway, so the guy that says,
go to the second floor or go up a mountain or something.
Right. Oh, which leads to this death is probably the point where you actually might laugh at the movie. So the guy that he said, he needs it up on the hill, and he says, well, don't let him use it till I clear it, right? Well, of course that guy says, well, I need it, and he goes and he grabs it. And somehow is able to get it without anybody seeing him, where he takes it away, even though these things are loud as shit.
He sneaks away with it.
Yes, he sneaks away. Well, not really, because the mechanic guy sees him and says, hey, stop. And then the thing starts taking off on him. It starts controlling itself. Now, here again, here's the logic. Let's say a bulldozer takes off on its own, right?
Yeah.
There's only one way it's going to kill you, which is it's going to either have to flip itself over and somehow blow up, or it's going to have to go off a cliff. Right? Those are the only two ways. If you just stay in the thing, because it's an open cab, it can't suffocate you. There are no moving parts inside except for levers, which I guess could bludgeon your knees, but they can't reach your head. So how would this machine kill you if you just stayed in it? It would eventually happen.
I don't know.
Right?
I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, it wouldn't. So what does this guy do? This guy who looks like he's in very good shape jumps out and gets into this thing where he's running in circles with it in a small area. And there are these, those big kind of conduit tubes that you see a lot in construction sites, the big kind of plastic.
Yeah. The giant concrete ones, yeah.
Well, they're metal, I think. But yeah, same idea. Like, so almost for like HVAC or something. So there's these tubes. And for some reason, this guy who is outrunning the killdozer at this point crawls into one of them. And then the bulldozer runs him over and crushes him, which... At that point, I went, wow, they're not even really trying to make these deaths look at all like something that can happen, because it is about the stupidest thing any human being could do. I mean, it's just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make a lot of sense, no.
0 sense. So then, and Kelly shows up and sees this happen. So he sees that the bulldozer is driving itself and not in a straight line, but it's moving in different directions and crushes the guy, and he sees it happen. So logically then, the rest of the guys, when he comes back, ask him, well, how did he die? And this is what he says.
Okay, how did it happen? Don't give us none of that about the D9er going haywire. We want to know.
I don't know why.
You were there. You saw it. Maybe you were seeing pink elephants, too.
Kelly, Mac, and Al are dead.
Get off his back. I saw Belton lose control and go plowing into that radio before the thing ran away with it. You must have bailed out. You saw by the tracks how he got it. What more do you need? A logical explanation.
You know, he's got to come up with one sooner or later.
It's gonna have to be later because there's an hour of daylight left and there's work to be done. So let's get at it, huh?
Right. So he's still doing this thing.
That's weird that despite all this, he's like, we need to keep working. It's like, yeah, but people are dying. Like,
right. And there's a guy. So basically the who I'll call the corporate man or the company man is then right after this or shortly after this kind of corners him and says, you know, hey, what are we going to do about this machine? And again, we get this, because again, I have to emphasize, he saw the machine making turns. This wasn't like he showed up right at the end as the guy got run over. Because in a sense, if all he saw was a guy crawl into a tube and a thing ran over him, even I'd be like, this guy was too stupid to be operating heavy machinery, let's be honest. But he watched it chasing him around for a little bit first. So he has to know that it's not just that this machine is out of control. Out of control machines don't chase down a guy. It just doesn't make any sense. So it's and he's not drunk. Again, they could have explained it where maybe he took a drink, and that was why that he didn't want to tell them that he'd been drunk and he didn't really know what he saw.
If you started drinking again, yes, that's an angle.
And that's why the guy says maybe you were seeing pink elephants, but we know that he was not. We've seen that. And every time he's offered a drink, he refuses. So it all lines up, and that the guy who comes to his defense is the mechanic, who says, no, I saw it. It was taking off on its own. So the mechanic, I guess, maybe is lending some weight to it being out of control. But still, the guy who saw it, the Kelly, the foreman, he has to know at this point that something is not right, and it's not just the machine going crazy. But then when he's asked about it, this is what he says to the corporate guy, separate from everybody else.
Kelly, Bob Beltran, what exactly did you see?
Pink elephants.
Straight, huh?
The D9er was operating by itself when it ran him down. Throttling, pivoting, floating the blade.
How?
I don't know how. Some malfunction in the controls. You've seen rogue machinery operate before.
Look, I heard McCarthy, too. I'm trying to warn you. A blue light, my God, it was there in the blade.
You don't believe that.
The question is, do you?
No. Dutch, shut that noise off and get some sleep.
When in doubt, boss around.
Now don't you start.
Kelly, you can't play ostrich.
That D9 is harmless now. It's out of fuel or racked up out there somewhere. So we leave it be and let the company engineers come in and find the bugs in it later.
And if you're wrong?
Tomorrow's gonna be another tough day. You'd better get some sleep.
Again, just saying we gotta get back to work. Oh, it's harmless.
It is nutty. I'll give you that. That's his.
Yeah. That's where if they had made him maybe take a drink or something, where you could understand that he's not in his right mind.
Or maybe he's just so locked into a fear.
Well, that's
if he doesn't do it, you know.
I think it's the idea that he's trying to rationalize what he's seeing. So then we see that guy, the company man, not Kelly, not the foreman. The company man kind of goes out in the woods at night and sees the dozer just sitting there, which then comes alive and sort of comes at him, and he runs. And so he knows that there's something wrong with it. And then the next day, the dozer shows up and basically destroys the camp. And now they're all watching it. So at this point now, everybody sees the rogue dozer just going crazy. It knocks everything down, destroys their tents, blows up their fuel, all this type of thing, and then just leaves. And so after that point, now everybody knows that something's going on. And so they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, and they're having a discussion about what they can do about it. And this is part of that discussion.
There's food, canned stuff, 2 jerry's of water.
That ought to hold us till the supply boat day after tomorrow. Hey, Dutch, will you shut that thing off?
He's coming off his spool. Remote control. That's got to be it, huh?
That thing is running by remote control. Listen. Listen, you guys. We gotta do something. I mean, something's wrong. Machines just don't run by themselves. That means there's somebody else on this island. You know, foreign spies or something.
How about a mad scientist?
No, listen, Dennis. Come on, I'm serious.
We're wasting
Wait.
time.
There's got to be a logical explanation.
Got him gassed up?
Yep. I'd sure like to know what that D9er's running on.
Yeah, so would I. We gotta get out of here.
Where to?
That high ground.
Oh, we're not going after the D9?
Well, not until we figure out how. That dynamite didn't phase it.
I still say it's remote control.
We can move faster. We'll hide and run. Gain time until that ship shows up.
You're calling the shots.
So the conspiracy guy is the one who said, oh, it's foreign spies. They're remote controlling it. Because, I mean, he's still trying to apply some kind of rationalization to it. And you even hear the other guy say, well, what's it running on? He's like, I don't know. So they basically, they have 2 Jeeps and some supplies. They get into them, and their idea is they're going to light a signal fire so that maybe a passing plane or something could see them, or otherwise they're going to go for high ground and try to stay away from the machine. And he says, you know, we can go faster than it because we're in these Jeeps.
That is true.
Which the movie is going to disprove very quickly. But anyway, they're moving around, and so the 2 of them are going there, and somehow the machine surprises them. Now, because they're driving along, they're looking around, and the machine is, I guess, on a hill or something, and suddenly comes out of nowhere and manages to roll over one of the Jeeps and kill the 2 guys in it. So now we're down to just the company man.
How?
You can't. Don't. It's, again, they sort of tried to make it look plausible, but it doesn't. So now it's down to the 2 guys, and at this point they're like, well, not that they exactly say, oh, I forgot. So then they're, before it gets down to the 2 guys, where there's the 3 guys left, the machine starts causing a rock slide at the beach that they're at. Now, when I tell you that the rock slide, number one, it's clearly just pushing down little tiny rocks that probably wouldn't do more than skin your knee. But also, they're on a beach next to a cliff. But you know how a beach and a cliff usually are. You have some beach away from the cliff.
Yeah.
This rock slide, all they had to do was walk out to the water, and there was no threat. Nothing. And yet they act as if they're trapped in a ravine, and it's dumping stuff on them. So they managed to escape the rock slide. This is what I mean about it. At some point, you just have to check your brain and say, okay, they could have done this better. So they escape, with big quotes, from that. And the guy who said, oh, it must be remote control, gets drunk and decides to drive out on the beach to go swimming with this thing running around. Yes. And then he kind of ditches, he hits a ditch with the Jeep, and sure enough, the killdozer suddenly is on the beach. Again, somehow not spotted, even though it's bright yellow and loud as all shit. And so it starts coming at him, and he can't start the Jeep. And rather than get out and run, he just sits there and closes his eyes, and the thing runs him over. Now we're down to 2. Yes. So now we're down. I know. Now we're down to the 2 guys. And the 2 guys are like, okay, well, it's alive, I guess. So what are we going to do? So first they have a standoff with it, with one of these big things that like a ditch digger, but like the big ones with the pulleys and everything, with the shovel machine. Yeah. So they managed to fight it to a standstill somehow, where it just decides to stop long enough for them to get this. Now we're maybe 15 minutes left in the movie. They get out and say, let's just run away from it. We're faster than it. And they outrun it, which calls the rest of the movie into question. But they basically outrun it. And for some reason it stops and it just kind of sits there. And they decide to come up with a plan to try to kill it. And this is their plan.
Dutchie was right. You can't kill a machine.
What?
Kill a machine. Hey, wait a minute. Of course you can't kill a machine. Don't you see our mistake?
Yeah. The thing. Whatever. That's what has to be stopped. But how?
I don't know how. But there's a way. There's gotta be a way. Think, man. How do you go about killing
a killer? It's too heavy to hang. It's too big to put in the gas chamber.
Wait a minute. Electricity.
Brilliant.
Now, I'm serious. Electrocution. We shoot juice into that big dozer. We got that generator.
Looks damaged.
Maybe, maybe not. We need a conductor of some kind.
You're spinning your wheels, Kelly.
No, I'm not. It'll work. And that's what's gonna make it work. Come on, Sarbo, give me a hand. You got it straight? Gonna make that dozer charge the grader. When it gets both treads on that grid, wham, we fry it like bacon.
Assuming it'll come from that direction.
I'll jockey the grader.
And assuming it's dumb enough to be suckered.
And you're gonna be at that generator, ready to throw the switch, right?
If it doesn't work,
It has to. It's under warranty. You know, you may make it yet, Sarbo.
Now, the guy that he's calling Sarbo, which I don't even know what that nickname is because his name's Dennis, so I guess that's just something we're supposed to know. One thing I should have gotten a clip of it, I didn't, is that guy has one really great line that made me think of all movies, Heat, where there's a part, no, I'm not kidding. I found part of the quote here where he and that guy are going back and forth, I think a little earlier in the movie where he's talking about sticking together and he's like, screw you, it's every man for himself. And he's like, what do you mean? And he says, my life philosophy is, I've got the quote here, or part of the quote here. Quote, never have anything you care about losing. Travel light and travel alone, end quote. And I thought, man, don't get attached to anything that you're not willing to walk out in 30 seconds if you feel the heat coming around the corner.
There you go.
So basically, that's the irony is now it's the two of them because the two of them have been the most at odds kind of just in their whole way of approaching life the whole movie. And so now it's down to the two of them. They lay this trap for the thing and sure enough, they manage to lure it onto the treads and they manage to electrocute it. And when they do, it starts screaming because it's got some kind of life force in it. And the electrocution kills the thing. And you see like the blue light kind of dissolves and goes away. And then the dozer just dies and they won. And then they have this little conversation at the end about, well, okay, we killed it, but how are we going to explain? Because the company's going to show up. How do we explain that there's 4 dead people and that we just electrocuted a living dozer? And they have this discussion about it.
Listen,
Nothing.
the hum's gone. The thing's dead.
Yeah. But we're not exactly home free.
No, I guess not. All we got is our word that the thing existed.
You know, we could fake things. Tell the authorities the guys got caught in a landslide.
No, tell the truth.
No matter what.
No matter what.
You know, in about 100 years, I might get to like you.
And blow your whole philosophy?
All I know is I'm sure glad to be alive.
So am I, Sarbo. So am I.
And then we get this weird love themed end, which is just weird. Bizarre. Yeah, and that goes on for a while, but that's the ending of the movie, and that's where he says the thing about blowing the philosophy. And I like the fact that the guy's like, nope, we're just going to tell him what happened. Screw it. You know, I'm not going to start lying now. This is how I've decided to do things.
Yeah.
And then the movie ends on a freeze frame of him like throwing his hard hat in the air, and that's when the music comes in. It's like, a love boat, and then just fades off. So it's an inept movie in that they never really solve the problem of how ridiculous the premise is. That's its primary failing, is there's no point where you feel like this bulldozer should have killed anybody. And in fact, the only death that makes any real sense is the one where the bulldozer didn't really do it. It's where the blast of energy comes out and kills Robert Urich. That's the only one that you could say, okay, that one, there was no preventing that. That one was kind of, you could try to explain it away as some freak accident, I guess, because at that point there's no evidence of anything else. But then everybody else dies in such stupid ways that it's never scary. This bulldozer is never scary. It's more of just, why would this happen?
The one guy who just sits there and takes it. I mean,
oh yeah. Yeah.
Like,
So but the thing is,
I mean, it would work more if all they needed was a line in there about when you get close to the thing, you feel this feeling of dread.
yes.
And somebody's saying something like, yeah, if that thing was right on top of you, I don't know if I could move.
Yes, or if it was causing what could be construed as freak accidents. I mean, eventually you'd have to get out from under that. But let's say they were working underground or in a trench, and it knocked a boulder in there and crushed a guy, or they
could have been more subtle.
There were other, or if it ran over explosive stuff and burned the guy in the cab. But it was fine because there's one point where it's running over, basically fuel barrels and they're blowing up. And it's fine. It's just doing it to be a dick, which I kind of like. There's points where the thing just acts like an asshole. It's not even really trying to kill them. It just bulldozes their camp because it's like, fuck you. And I'm kind of okay with that, where it seems to have some kind of personality. That's interesting.
Hey, fuck you guys.
Yeah. It's like, hey, fuck you. I'm the fuckdozer. You're done. And it's it. So I like that. And
who can fuck the fuckdozer? Indeed.
Who fucks the fuckdozer? Yeah, exactly. So and there's parts. The movie is actually, I liked it because I like the actors. They're I like the guy sticking to, no, I'm not gonna drink, and we're gonna get this job done because he's like attaching his whole self to the thing, and he's like, we're gonna tell the truth. And the other guy's an asshole, and the joke about I could come to like you in 100 years. Like there's stuff where you can see that there's interesting material in there.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm glad I watched it.
It's within a context of absurdity.
Yes, I was never bored. I was bemused. I was confused at multiple points because, like when the guy stopped with the Jeep, I think I audibly said out loud, "Oh, come on." And he just gets run over because there's just no, even that.
Come on. Yeah,
even
just
that,
go.
No, but
just
even
go.
that could,
yeah.
you could even do that exact scene and not have it be ridiculous because at one point the guy said he's coming apart, right?
If the Jeep had wouldn't start, and then they could have done something so simple like have his shoelace get stuck or anything.
Well, or the Jeep could have wrecked on something and caught his foot in like metal or whatever.
Yeah, any number of things you could have done. Yeah,
but I'll even give him this: you could even have had the death happen exactly the same, where he just gives up, because earlier they had said he's coming apart. And it could be this thing where suddenly he just looks up and he can't handle it and he just shuts down and stares at it. Okay, it still would seem silly, but it would be more believable than a guy who wanted to go swimming that can't start his Jeep and rather than even try to run, just decides to sit there and get run over.
Maybe the desire to swim was just so intense that when he couldn't, it just was the end of his life.
I guess maybe that's what they were setting up with him coming out of his spool, I suppose. But that's the problem with the movie. Is that it just never makes sense that this bulldozer could kill anybody. Outside of that, it's actually a watchable movie because I like all the characters. Like they're actually good actors.
No, I actually listening to them speak and everything. Yeah, it's kind of like they sound cool. They sound interesting. They sound the writing. You know what it is? It's that they sound interesting and well written. So why is the rest of it so poorly written?
Well, the problem is that I'm trying to remember who directed this thing. I want to see who the director is. I thought the director did other stuff. The problem is that the director just never was able to figure out how to film this in a way that made this thing seem
plausible,
believably scary. This guy mostly did TV, so I guess he just did a lot of TV. Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
I mean, honestly,
Murder.
I want to read the novella now to find out how Sturgeon did it.
Yeah. Kojak. Yeah, this guy did a lot of TV, so I maybe he was just out of his depth on this. Where he was used to dealing with human-driven stories and the idea of trying to make a bulldozer be scary.
How do you make a bulldozer scary? I mean, honestly, they either should have made it faster, or honestly, they should have had it kill a lot of people before they realized that it was the bulldozer. Would have been interesting if they got halfway through and had it look like accidents. And then be like, wait a minute.
Yes. So the thing with the rock slide, right? I mean, just have a guy decide to sleep underneath the rocks and the thing tumbles the rocks on him. Instead of it doing it while they're all looking up at it, doing it and being able to get very easily away from the rock slide or whatever you want to call that. That's the problem, is they don't establish the kills as being in any way realistic on a movie that's grounded outside of the fact that it's a space alien meteorite that takes over a bulldozer. Everything else, though, is played as straight. And so you could even have had the bulldozer somehow. You and I could write a dozen ways that this movie doesn't even bother. Everybody in this movie just essentially sits there and waits for it and gets killed.
We're gonna
pretty
die.
much.
Yeah.
Or, why would you crawl into a tube?
No.
Obviously, it's not like it was a concrete bunker that the bulldozer somehow managed to break.
You run, and then you make a sharp turn. Then you run, and you take a sharp turn. And you just keep going, man.
Yeah. Or jump on top of it and just ride it out.
Yeah, that's another thing you could do, yeah.
Because it would have to kill itself to kill you at that point. Like, it would have to go off a cliff, at which point it would be destroyed. So, yeah, that's the problem with it, is everything else about it. That there's actually good shots. Like, the direction is, outside of not making the bulldozer scary, he's got some interesting shots. Like, it looks good. It doesn't look cheap. They have real earth-moving equipment, so it's not like they're driving trucks with a cardboard bulldozer cut out on them or that type of thing. They had real machinery. So everything about it, and the actors are good. So everything about it feels like they got good people. They got the right equipment to make it. They have
they just didn't know how to make it work.
It's the soundtrack and the fact that it just is never scary. And so for a movie that is framed as a horror film, I mean, that's what this is supposed to be, is a killer machine movie. At no point do you ever buy this machine as something that could actually kill you. When a child could figure out how to dodge this thing, I mean, literally the only thing that might scare a child is the size of it. Might paralyze a young child to not know how to run from it. But if you yelled at a kid, run, a kid would be able to escape this thing.
Yeah, and there's ways to make it work.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's what I mean. I could see somebody making the same film, same plot, same things, and just making 2 or 3 different decisions, and it would be an actual, probably not a great movie, but it could probably be a fun movie. As it exists now, the fun is, why would human beings with functioning brains do these things?
How did they kill everybody? Yeah,
it's the whole thing with. I kept thinking of Charlize Theron in Prometheus.
Oh, just run
left.
Yeah, if you just run left or right, guys, it's rolling at you. Just run to the side. Yeah,
right. And in fact, the guy who gets killed by crawling in the tube, he is running away from it in big circles and is managing to evade it for a while. You would think that he would go, oh, why don't I just run in a straight line away from it? Or run into the water. They're near the ocean. It's not going to follow you into the water. And even if it did,
you could swim
eventually
above it,
you will be above it, and then it's screwed. So that's what I think. But there are people, I read reviews, and I don't disbelieve them, because a lot of them said, I saw this when I was a kid, and I really like it. I think there's a big nostalgia factor for people who probably saw this when it was on TV and genuinely seem to like this movie. And if I had watched this as a kid and watched it now, I found it charming overall. I found it to be a charming, adorable movie. That's, from a logic standpoint, is an utter failure, but is somehow entertaining in its failings. And I don't mind it, because there's enough that it's doing, properly enough, that even though you cannot ignore its humongous black holes of logic, you don't really care, because it's still a fun movie to watch. So I can understand if you saw this as a kid, maybe did not think about the logic and saw it as a scary machine, that would probably color your later viewings of it. So I understand why there are people who legitimately, as adults, say, oh, I love this movie. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And a lot of them say, I remember seeing this on TV as a kid. Okay, I can see that. There's movies that I'm like that too, where I'm like, yeah, this actually isn't a good movie, but I saw it as a kid, and so I don't really care. I just never saw this as a kid. So I look at it purely as an adult, and I think, how could this have killed anybody outside of Robert Urich, because there was an explosion of energy? Outside of that, this thing is not threatening. It's not scary. And at no point does it come off as anything but ludicrous. But if you don't care about that type of stuff, because this is viewable free everywhere, if you're into like killer vehicles, you might actually have fun with this. Just don't go into it expecting it to make a lot of sense. But there is something in this movie that is compelling enough that I didn't get to the end of it and feel like I wasted my time.
Well, if you like all the characters and you like the dialogue, I mean, it seems like they're interesting characters to be with.
Yeah. Yeah. And the dialogue is good. You've heard some examples of it, and some I didn't even capture. But there is some good kind of dialogue, and the the characters feel more real than the bulldozer does. Well, the killer bulldozer does. So that is something that I think is enough to carry it. Also because it's very short. If this was 2 hours, it might be a lot harder to recommend to anybody. But the fact that it's not even a 90-minute movie, yeah, it did go by quick. I at one point I thought there's only 2 people left, and then sure enough there was only like 15 minutes left of the movie. And even then I was like, well, if these people can't survive against this thing on an open beach, how are they going to survive for the next 15 minutes? And it's only because they got into a giant shovel machine and somehow, I guess, made the bulldozer tired so it couldn't attack them right away. I mean, again, if you try to apply any brain power to this thing, the whole thing falls apart. But if you just kind of go with it, that somehow this bulldozer is just so imposing in its, I guess, weight that it makes people act dumb, then the movie is kind of like, it's like eating a box of nerds. You know there's nothing to this thing, and there's not really anything good about it, but it tastes good at the time. So go ahead, eat a box of nerds. Once in a while, you have the cinematic equivalent of a box of nerds, and just don't think too much about it. So Killdozer, you can watch it everywhere, so you won't have to pay anything for it. It's like it's almost on every friggin' service, including the ad-supported ones, so you will find it easily. And if the clips or my descriptions at all sound interesting, you will probably have a fun time. There are certainly worse ways to spend an hour and 20 minutes or so. And on that note, that is it for this week. And we'll be back on our normal time next week. Sadly, I don't think that the ratings on the Nano Love podcast will warrant a continuation of it. So I wouldn't hold your breath for an episode 2. So it'll probably just be back to us at our normal time. Same bat channel, same bat time next week. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Talk to you later. Visit OzoneNightmare.com to subscribe to new episodes, browse through our back catalog, or to find links to support the show. Follow @OzoneNightmare on Twitter for the latest episode postings and other show information. If 280 characters just isn't enough, you can always email us, theozonenightmare@gmail.com. The opening theme for the show is provided by Heartbeat Hero. The closing theme is provided by Ogre. Please visit and support these artists using the links in the show notes for each episode.